The great hall of the Bloodfang Pack stood like a fortress of shadow and stone, its towering pillars etched with runes that pulsed faintly under the silver kiss of moonlight. The air was thick, not with smoke alone, but with the weight of expectation. Tonight, the Luna trials would begin, and every soul in the hall knew that before the moon waned, destinies would be forged or broken. They gathered in silence at first, warriors with eyes like burning coals, elders whose faces were carved by centuries of tradition, and the young, restless and hungry for glory. The scent of pine resin from the braziers mingled with the musk of fur and leather, a reminder that beneath their human forms, the wolf was never far. At the far end of the hall, upon a dais of black marble, the High Elder emerged. Draped in crimson ceremonial robes, his presence alone commanded stillness. In his hands, he carried an ancient scroll bound in silver thread, the same thread that had bound it for 1,000 years. The hall seemed to lean toward him as he stepped into the moonlight. With a slow, deliberate motion, he untied the thread. The parchment unfurled with a whisper, as though the names it held were eager to be spoken. His voice, deep and resonant, rolled through the chamber. By the will of the moon spirit, the trials shall begin. Tonight, the chosen will be named. One by one, the names fell into the air like stones into still water, each sending ripples through the crowd. Some names drew nods of respect, others sharp glances of rivalry. The tension swelled with every syllable. Then the moment came. Alenya Velorin. The name hung in the air, strange and out of place. Heads turned. Murmurs rose like wind before a storm. A few chuckles broke the silence, quickly swelling into open laughter. A human, an orphan, a mistake. In the back of the hall, Alenya froze. Her heart pounded, but she did not lower her gaze. The High Elder's eyes flickered toward her, unreadable, before returning to the scroll. The laughter faded into a charged silence. The storm had gathered. The trials had begun. At the far end of the great hall, seated apart from the other elders and warriors, Alpha Kaelor Drovane watched the proceedings with the stillness of a predator conserving its strength. His presence was a weight in the room, not loud, not showy, but undeniable. Broad-shouldered, dark-haired, and carved from the kind of strength that needed no display, Kaelor was the embodiment of the Bloodfang's power. Yet his eyes, a cold steel gray, betrayed no excitement for the Luna trials. Where others leaned forward in anticipation, Kaelor leaned back in his high-backed chair, one hand resting lazily on the armrest, the other drumming a slow, almost impatient rhythm. The trials were tradition, sacred to the pack, but to Kaelor they were a relic, a performance meant to appease the elders and the moon spirit, but rarely to reveal true strength. He had fought real battles, bled in real wars. No staged contest could measure the worth of a wolf. As the High Elder's voice rolled through the hall, Kaelor's gaze rolled over the chosen. He knew most of them, warriors he had trained beside, rivals he had bested, youngbloods eager to prove themselves. His expression did not change. Then came the name that broke the rhythm. Alenya Velorin. The laughter that followed was sharp, almost cruel. Kaelor's eyes shifted toward the sound, settling on the small figure standing at the back. Human, fragile, out of place. She met the mockery with a stillness that caught his attention. Not defiance exactly, but something quieter, a refusal to shrink. For a moment, his gaze lingered. Not in admiration, not yet, but in curiosity. Most would have looked away, cowed by the weight of the pack's scorn. She didn't. The moment passed. Kaelor's expression smoothed back into indifference, and he turned his attention away as though she were no more than a passing shadow. But somewhere, deep beneath the armor of his disinterest, a question had been planted. The hall moved on, the names continued, and the laughter faded. Yet Kaelor's mind, disciplined as it was, found itself circling back to the girl who did not bow her head. The High Elder's voice carried the weight of centuries, each name spoken like a stone dropped into the still waters of tradition. The crowd absorbed them with murmurs of approval or the sharp glint of rivalry in their eyes. Then, without warning, the rhythm faltered. Alenya Velorin. The name struck the hall like a discordant note. For a heartbeat, there was only silence, the kind that feels like the air itself has been stolen away. Then came the murmurs, low at first, swelling into a tide of disbelief. A human? The word rippled through the crowd, whispered with incredulity, spat with disdain. Laughter followed, sharp, mocking, unrestrained. Warriors smirked openly, some shaking their heads as if the very idea were absurd. Others leaned toward their neighbors, trading cruel jokes under their breath. At the back of the hall, Alenya stood frozen. The sound of her name still echoed in her ears, but it felt wrong, as though it belonged to someone else. She had come only to watch, to witness the trials she had dreamed of since childhood. She had no place among the chosen. Her heart pounded, but she did not lower her gaze. She had learned long ago that lowering her head only invited more cruelty. Instead, she stood still, her hands clenched at her sides, her breath steady, despite the heat rising in her chest. The High Elder's eyes flickered toward her, and for the briefest moment, something unreadable passed across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or calculation. But he said nothing. The scroll remained open in his hands, the inked names unyielding. Somewhere near the dais, a young warrior barked a laugh loud enough to draw more attention. "What's next?" he jeered. "Will the pups be allowed to compete?" The crowd roared with approval. Alenya's cheeks burned, but she did not move. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her retreat. The High Elder cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the noise. The laughter ebbed, though the smirks remained. Without acknowledging the disruption, he continued reading the next name, as though nothing unusual had happened. But the damage was done. The hall had marked her, not as a contender, but as an intruder. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a spark caught flame. The laughter still lingered in the air like the echo of a cruel wind, but in the midst of it, a silence formed, not in the hall, but in the mind of Alpha Kaelor Drovane. From his seat upon the dais, he had watched the human girl stand beneath the weight of the pack's ridicule. She was small, unremarkable in stature, her frame lacking the raw power that defined his kind. Yet she did not flinch. She did not lower her eyes. Kaelor's gaze found her through the shifting crowd, cutting through the haze of torchlight and shadow. His eyes, cold and assessing, lingered on her face. He was not impressed, not yet, but there was something in the way she held herself, a quiet defiance that did not roar but refused to bend. Around him, the elders murmured, their voices a low tide of disapproval. To them, she was an error, a blemish on the sanctity of the trials. Kaelor had no interest in defending her. Tradition was not his shield, nor was sentiment his weakness. But he had learned, in battle and in life, that strength wore many faces, and sometimes it hid in the least expected places. Alenya felt his eyes before she saw them. When she finally looked toward the dais, their gazes locked. The hall seemed to fade, the jeers and whispers dulling to a distant hum. His expression was unreadable, carved from the same stone as the walls around them. For a heartbeat, she wondered if he would speak, if he would call for her removal, or worse, join in the mockery. But Kaelor said nothing. He simply studied her, as though weighing something unseen. Then, without a word, he looked away. The connection broke, leaving her with the strange sensation that she had been measured and not entirely dismissed. The High Elder's voice rose again, pulling the hall back into motion. Names continued to fall from the scroll, but for Alenya, the moment lingered, the cold, piercing gaze of the Alpha who had seen her, if only for an instant. And somewhere deep within Kaelor, a question began to take root. The High Elder's voice carried on, but for Alenya, the world had narrowed to the sound of her own heartbeat. Her name had been spoken once already, and the sting of the pack's laughter still clung to her like smoke. She told herself it was a mistake, that the Elder would correct it, strike her from the list, and the night would move on without her. But then it came again. Alenya Velorin. The second calling was deliberate. No slip of the tongue, no reprieve. The hall erupted once more, though this time the laughter was sharper, tinged with disbelief that she had not already fled. A few voices called out mockingly, daring her to step forward. Others simply stared, their eyes cold and dismissive, as though she were a blemish on the sacred rite. Alenya's stomach twisted, but she stood her ground. She had lived her whole life on the fringes of this pack, tolerated but never truly accepted. She had fetched water, mended clothes, tended wounds after hunts, all in the hope that one day she might be seen as more than the human orphan they had taken in out of pity. This was not how she had imagined her chance would come. Her fear was real, a cold, coiled thing in her chest, but beneath it something else stirred, a truth she had carried quietly for years. If she turned away now, she would never be more than the girl who didn't belong. She stepped forward. Not far, just enough for the torchlight to catch her face. Her voice, when it came, was steady. "I accept." The words were simple, but they cut through the noise like a blade. The laughter faltered, replaced by a murmur of surprise. Even the High Elder's brows lifted slightly before he inclined his head, marking her choice. Somewhere on the dais, Kaelor Drovane's gaze flickered toward her again, not warm, not approving, but watchful. Alenya did not look away. She had made her choice. Whatever came next, she would face it on her feet. The crowd was still murmuring when a shadow detached itself from the far wall. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the easy confidence of someone who had never once been doubted. Ravik Thorn. Alenya knew his name the way one knows the sound of a predator's growl, instinctively, without needing to be told. He was the favored contender for this year's trial, the one everyone expected to win. His victories in the hunt were spoken of like legend, his temper like a storm no one wished to stand beneath. He didn't approach the dais, he came to her. The space around them seemed to thin as others stepped back, eager to watch but not be caught in the crossfire. Ravik stopped close enough that she could see the faint scar running from his temple to his jaw, a mark of some past battle he had clearly survived. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice low, meant for her alone. "And if you step into that forest, you won't come back." It wasn't a threat, not exactly. More like a statement of fact, delivered with the certainty of someone who had already decided the outcome. Alenya met his gaze. She wanted to look away, to shrink back into the safety of the crowd, but something in her refused. "Then I suppose," she said quietly, "we'll see." For a heartbeat, his expression didn't change. Then a faint, humorless smile touched his lips, the kind that said he admired her nerve almost as much as he intended to crush it. The dawn broke cold and silver. The moon's retreat, leaving the forest shrouded in a mist that clung low to the earth. The Bloodfang Pack gathered at the edge of the trial grounds, a vast expanse of ancient woodland whose trees rose like the ribs of some slumbering beast. The air was sharp with pine and damp earth, but beneath it ran the electric scent of anticipation. The High Elder stood before the contestants, his crimson robes stirring in the wind. Behind him, the forest loomed, dark, endless, and alive with the whisper of unseen things. "The first trial," his voice rang out, "is one of strength. You will run the forest gauntlet, a path that shifts with the will of the moon spirit. You will face illusions, traps, and the weight of your own endurance. Only those who reach the stone altar at the heart of the woods will pass." A ripple of excitement and fear moved through the gathered wolves. Muscles tensed, claws flexed beneath human skin. Some shifted their weight forward, eager to run. Others glanced sideways, measuring their competition. Alenya stood among them, her breath clouding in the cold air. She could feel the eyes on her, some openly mocking, others simply curious to see how quickly she would fail. She had no claws to call upon, no supernatural speed to carry her. But she had her senses, her wits, and the stubborn refusal to turn back. Ravik Thorn caught her gaze from a few paces away. His smirk was slow, deliberate, a promise that he would leave her in the dust. The High Elder raised his hand. "Run with the strength of your blood," he intoned, "and may the moon spirit judge you worthy." The horns sounded. The pack surged forward as one, a blur of muscle and speed, their footfalls pounding the earth. Alenya was swallowed in their wake, the forest closing around her like a living thing. The air grew colder, the light dimmer, and the path ahead twisted in ways that defied sense. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf's howl split the air, not a call of triumph, but a warning. The gauntlet had begun. The forest closed in quickly, swallowing the light and the sound of the cheering pack. The air was damp and heavy, thick with the scent of moss and something older, something watching. The werewolves ahead tore through the undergrowth like arrows loosed from a bow, their supernatural speed carrying them over roots and rocks without pause. Branches snapped, leaves scattered in their wake. Alenya, already winded, could hear their footfalls fading into the distance. She slowed, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Her lungs burned, her legs ached, and the path ahead was a shifting blur. The trees seemed to move when she wasn't looking, their trunks subtly twisting, their branches knitting together to block her way. Illusions. The High Elder had warned of them, but the wolves relied on instinct and brute force to push through. Alenya knew better. She had grown up in these woods, not as a predator, but as prey, learning to read the forest's moods, to notice the details others missed. She stopped, closed her eyes, and listened. The forest spoke in layers, the rustle of leaves, the distant drip of water, the faint hum of magic in the air. Beneath it all, she heard something else, the steady trickle of a stream. Water didn't lie. Illusions could twist the path, but they couldn't change the pull of the land itself. She turned toward the sound, ignoring the false trail that shimmered faintly ahead. The ground grew softer underfoot, the air cooler. She followed the stream until it bent sharply, revealing a narrow gap between two boulders. It was barely wide enough for her to slip through, a path no wolf in full form could take without slowing. She squeezed into the gap, scraping her shoulder on the stone, and emerged into a clearing untouched by the shifting magic. Somewhere ahead, she heard the crash of undergrowth and the frustrated growl of a wolf who had taken the wrong turn. She smiled, just a little, and kept moving. The forest was still dangerous, but she had found her rhythm. She would not outrun them, but she could outthink them. The forest spat them out one by one. The first to emerge from the shifting tree line was Ravik Thorn, his chest heaving, his skin slick with sweat. He crossed the stone altar with the easy swagger of someone who had never doubted his own victory. The crowd roared, the younger wolves chanting his name. Others followed, warriors with torn sleeves and bloodied knuckles, their eyes still wild from the illusions they'd fought through. Some stumbled, disoriented, collapsing to their knees before the healers. The gauntlet had taken its toll. Minutes passed. The cheering began to fade into murmurs. The elders exchanged knowing glances. The human girl would not be coming. Then a figure appeared at the edge of the trees. Alenya stepped into the clearing, her hair damp with mist, her clothes streaked with dirt and moss. She was breathing hard, but her stride was steady. She did not run, did not stagger. She simply walked to the altar and placed her hand upon the cold stone. A ripple of silence moved through the crowd. She was not first, not even close, but she was not last. More than a handful of wolves had yet to emerge. The High Elder's gaze lingered on her, unreadable. Around him, the murmurs shifted in tone, less mocking now, more curious. From his place on the dais, Kaelor Drovane watched her with the same cool detachment as before, but this time something in his eyes had changed. He had seen her vanish into the forest, swallowed by a trial designed to break the unworthy. And yet, here she stood, not triumphant, but unbroken. Ravik's smirk faltered for the briefest moment as their eyes met across the clearing. Alenya said nothing. She simply stepped back into the line of survivors, her chin lifted just enough to meet the stares without flinching. The gauntlet had not claimed her, and for the first time, the pack was forced to consider the possibility that she might not be as fragile as they believed. The survivors of the gauntlet stood in a loose line before the altar, their breaths still ragged, their bodies marked by the forest's trials. The healers moved among them, binding cuts, offering water, murmuring quiet words of praise or admonishment. Kaelor Drovane remained seated on the dais, his posture deceptively relaxed, but his eyes tracked every movement. He had seen the wolves who emerged first, their speed, their strength, their confidence, all expected, all predictable. Then there was the human girl. She stood apart from the others, not by choice, but by the subtle shift of bodies that left her on the edge of the group. She did not seek the healers, nor did she bask in the murmurs of surprise that followed her arrival. Instead, she simply stood, her gaze fixed on the forest as though it still held some secret she had yet to uncover. Kaelor's gaze lingered longer than he intended. He replayed the moment she had stepped from the trees, not stumbling, not broken, but steady. She had not conquered the gauntlet, but she had endured it, and endurance, he knew, was a rarer strength than most cared to admit. The elders beside him whispered, their voices low and dismissive. An anomaly, a fluke. Kaelor did not correct them. He had no interest in defending her, not yet, but he filed the image away, the way a hunter remembers the unexpected movement of prey in the underbrush. When her eyes lifted, they found his. There was no challenge in her gaze, no plea for approval, only the quiet certainty of someone who had survived what others thought she could not. For the first time that night, Kaelor's expression shifted. It was not a smile, nor was it warmth, but the faintest narrowing of his eyes betrayed a thought he would not voice aloud. Perhaps she is not here by mistake, after all. The High Elder's voice rose again, announcing the close of the first trial and the promise of the next. The crowd began to disperse, but Kaelor's mind remained on the girl who had walked out of the forest when she should have been left behind. The second trial was not announced with fanfare. It began in silence, under the pale light of a waning moon, the contestants summoned to a clearing deep within the forest. The air was sharp with the scent of frost and pine, but beneath it ran something darker, the faint tang of unease. The High Elder stood at the center of the clearing, his staff planted firmly in the earth. Around him, the chosen formed a loose circle, their breath misting in the cold. "This trial," he said, his voice carrying easily through the stillness, "is not of strength, but of loyalty. One among you has been hidden, a member of the pack who carries the moon spirit's blessing. Your task is to find them and return them here unharmed. The one who succeeds will prove their devotion to the pack above all else." A murmur rippled through the group. This was no race of speed or endurance. It was a hunt, and hunts could be manipulated. Alenya felt the shift immediately. The wolves around her inhaled deeply, testing the air, their senses sharpening. She did the same, though her human nose could not match theirs. Still, she had learned to read more than scent, the way the wind moved, the subtle changes in the forest's song. They were released into the trees. The forest was quieter than during the gauntlet, the magic subdued, as though watching. Alenya moved carefully, letting the others surge ahead. She knew she could not outpace them, but she could watch where they went and where they avoided. It was then she caught it, a faint, acrid note beneath the pine. Not the scent of the hidden pack member, but something else, something wrong. She followed it, weaving between the trees until she came upon a narrow ravine. There, half hidden in shadow, she saw it, a snare of silvered wire, cruel and precise, set to catch and maim, and caught in its path, struggling against the target of the trial, but another contestant. Blood darkened the earth beneath him. His eyes were wide with pain and fury. "It was Ravik," he hissed, through clenched teeth. "He set it for the target, but I found it first." Alenya's pulse quickened. The rules were clear. The trial was to find the hidden wolf, nothing more. Helping him would cost her precious time, maybe the trial itself. But leaving him? She looked back toward the path the others had taken, then down at the wounded wolf. The choice was hers. The wounded wolf's breathing was ragged, each inhale sharp with pain. The silvered wire bit deep into his leg, the metal glinting faintly in the moonlight. Alenya knew what silver did to their kind, how it burned, how it lingered in the blood like poison. Every second she hesitated was another second Ravik and the others gained on the true target. She crouched beside him, her fingers already working at the snare. The wire was tight, cruelly knotted, designed to resist even a wolf's strength. But she was human. Her smaller hands could slip into the narrow spaces, her touch precise where brute force would fail. "You're wasting time," he growled, his voice thick with both pain and disbelief. "Go, win." Alenya didn't answer. She kept working, ignoring the sting as the wire bit into her own skin. The forest around them was silent, as though holding its breath. Finally, the last knot gave way. The wire snapped loose, and the wolf collapsed forward, clutching his leg. His eyes met hers, still fierce, but now edged with something else. "Why?" he asked. She stood, wiping the blood from her hands. "Because leaving you here would make me no better than the one who set the trap." He stared at her for a long moment, then gave a short, sharp nod, the closest thing to gratitude she would get. By the time she turned back toward the hunt, the forest had shifted again. The trail was colder now, the scents muddled. She had lost her chance to win. But as she moved through the trees, she felt no regret. The trial was meant to measure loyalty, and she had shown hers, even if no one else would see it. The moon had climbed higher by the time the contestants returned to the clearing. One by one, they emerged from the trees, some triumphant, others empty-handed, all carrying the scent of the hunt. The hidden pack member had been found and escorted back by another competitor. The trial officially concluded. Alenya was among the last to arrive. Her clothes were torn, her hands streaked with blood, not her own, and her expression unreadable. She took her place at the edge of the group, ignoring the sidelong glances and whispered remarks. She had not won. She had not even come close. From the dais, Kaelor Drovane watched her with the same stillness he had worn since the trials began. But inside, his thoughts were anything but still. He had seen her veer from the hunt, had tracked her movements through the forest from a distance. He knew she had found the trap. He knew she had freed the wounded wolf. When the High Elder dismissed the contestants, Kaelor rose. His long strides carried him across the clearing, the crowd parting instinctively before him. Alenya looked up as his shadow fell over her. "You abandoned the trial," he said, his voice low, even. "I made a choice," she replied. His eyes narrowed slightly. "A choice that cost you any chance of victory." She met his gaze without flinching. "If winning means stepping over someone who's bleeding in the dirt, then I don't want it." For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind moving through the trees. Kaelor studied her, searching for the calculation he expected, the self-serving angle, the hidden ambition. But there was none. Her words were not a performance. They were simply the truth. It unsettled him more than he cared to admit. "You think loyalty is about mercy," he said. "It's not. Loyalty is about doing what's necessary for the pack." Her chin lifted a fraction. "And what happens to the pack if we forget mercy?" The question hung between them, heavier than any accusation. Kaelor's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. He turned away, his cloak stirring in the cold air, and returned to the dais without another word. From the edge of the clearing, the High Elder had been watching. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes followed Kaelor as he walked away, and then shifted to Alenya, lingering there for a long, thoughtful moment. The trial was over, but the ripples of her choice were only beginning to spread. Among the younger wolves, whispers had already begun, not of her failure, but of her defiance. And in the mind of the Alpha, a fracture had formed. Kaelor had always believed the trials were a measure of strength stripped of sentiment, but now, against his will, he found himself wondering if strength without compassion was worth anything at all. The campfire burned low, its embers pulsing like the heartbeat of the forest. Most of the contestants had retreated to their shelters, nursing wounds both visible and hidden. The night was quiet, save for the occasional crackle of wood and the distant howl of a lone wolf somewhere beyond the ridge. Alenya sat apart from the others, her back against a fallen log, the firelight painting her face in shifting gold and shadow. She was cleaning the blood from her hands, the last traces of the wolf she had freed, when she felt it, a presence. Kaelor stood at the edge of the fire's glow, silent, watching. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, they lingered on her longer than they should have. "You're still awake," he said at last, his voice low, almost reluctant. "I could say the same," she replied without looking up. He stepped closer, the firelight catching the faint silver in his hair. "You risked everything today for an animal that wasn't even part of the trial." Alenya's hands stilled. It wasn't about the animal. Then what was it about? She met his gaze, and for a moment neither of them moved. It was about not becoming the kind of leader who forgets what it means to protect the weak. Kaelor's jaw tightened, but not in anger. There was something else there, something he wasn't ready to name. He had spent years building walls around himself, brick by brick, until nothing could breach them. Yet here she was, chipping away at the mortar without even trying. "You think compassion will keep you alive in this world?" he asked. "No," she said simply, "but it will keep me human." The words struck deeper than she could have known. Kaelor had not thought of himself as human in a long time. Alpha, protector, strategist, yes, but human? That part of him had been buried beneath duty and blood. He looked away, scanning the dark tree line as if the answer might be hiding there. The pack doesn't need sentiment, it needs strength. Maybe it needs both, she countered. Silence stretched between them, but it was not the brittle silence of earlier. This was something else, a quiet charged with unspoken understanding. Finally, Kaelor turned to leave, but just before he stepped into the shadows, he paused. "The wolf you freed, it will remember you." Alenya frowned slightly. Wolves don't remember faces. They remember scents and intentions. His gaze lingered on her one last time before he disappeared into the night. She sat there long after he was gone, the fire's warmth fading against the chill creeping in. She didn't know why his words stayed with her, but they did. Somewhere deep inside, she sensed that the bond forming between them was not one either of them had chosen, and yet it was already changing them both. The night of the third trial arrived beneath a sky so clear it seemed the stars themselves had gathered to watch. The Bloodfang Pack assembled at the edge of the hollow vale, a place whispered about in campfire tales, a labyrinth of silver-leafed trees and shifting mist, known as the Lunar Maze. The High Elder's voice carried over the gathered crowd, deep and resonant. "This trial is not of muscle or cunning, it is of the heart. Within the maze, you will face what lies deepest within you, your fears, your truths, your unspoken desires. Only those who emerge whole will be deemed worthy." The contestants stepped forward one by one, each touching the carved moonstone archway before entering. When Alenya's turn came, she felt the stone's surface pulse faintly beneath her palm, as if recognizing her touch. A shiver ran through her, but she stepped inside. The moment she crossed the threshold, the world changed. The air grew thick, the ground soft beneath her boots. The silver leaves whispered in voices she almost understood. Paths twisted and reformed when she wasn't looking, the mist curling into shapes that dissolved when she blinked. She expected fear, the kind that claws at the mind and drags old wounds to the surface. But instead, the maze seemed to watch her. It guided her steps with subtle shifts in the mist, drawing her deeper. Somewhere far away, Kayor stood at the observation platform, his arms folded, eyes fixed on her. The other contestants stumbled, shouted, or froze in terror as their own demons rose to meet them. But Alenya moved with a strange calm, as if the maze were not her enemy. She passed through a grove where the moonlight pooled like liquid silver. In its reflection, she saw not herself, but a woman draped in white, her hair crowned with light, her eyes ancient and knowing. The vision's lips moved, but the words were lost in the rustle of leaves. Alenya reached out, and the image shattered into ripples, vanishing into the mist. Her heart pounded. She didn't understand what she had seen, but it felt important, like a memory she had never lived. Behind her, the path closed. Ahead, the maze beckoned. Far above, Kayor's gaze sharpened. He had seen the way the light had touched her, the way the mist had parted for her alone. Something in his chest tightened. Not suspicion, not yet belief, but the first stirrings of a truth he could no longer ignore. The lunar maze had chosen her path, and whatever waited at its heart was meant for her alone. The mist thickened as Alenya pressed deeper into the maze. The silver-leafed trees grew taller here, their trunks impossibly smooth, their branches arching overhead like the ribs of some ancient cathedral. The air shimmered faintly, as though she were walking through the breath of the moon itself. Her footsteps slowed. The path ahead was no longer solid earth, but a mirror-smooth surface of liquid light. She hesitated, then stepped forward, and the world dissolved. The forest was gone. She stood in a vast, open plain beneath a sky of swirling silver clouds. Towers of pale stone rose in the distance, their spires crowned with banners that glowed faintly in the moonlight. The air was warm, scented with night-blooming flowers. And everywhere she saw them, figures moving with grace and purpose, their eyes bright, their hair catching the light like spun silver. They were not wolves, not entirely human either. Something older, something luminous. One of them turned toward her, a woman tall and regal, her presence commanding without a word. Her gown was woven from threads of light, her gaze both fierce and kind. Alenya's breath caught. The woman's face was achingly familiar, though she knew she had never seen it before. The woman spoke, and though her lips barely moved, the words resonated inside Alenya's chest. "Child of the moon's first breath, you have walked far from home." Alenya's pulse thundered in her ears. "Who are you?" "I am what you will become, if you choose the path laid before you." The vision shifted, the towers crumbled, the silver sky darkened, and the plain was swallowed by shadow. Wolves howled in the distance, not in unity, but in rage. The woman's light dimmed, her form flickering. The bond was broken, the Luna lost, the pack divided. But the blood remembers. Alenya's hands began to glow faintly, a pale silver radiance seeping from her skin. She stared at them, heart racing. "Your blood carries the first light. It will awaken when the time comes. But beware, light draws shadow, and shadow will seek to claim you." The ground beneath her feet trembled. The vision began to fracture, shards of light and darkness spinning around her. She reached out toward the woman, desperate to hold on to the moment. "Find the heart of the maze," the voice urged, fading. "And remember, you are not what they think you are." The world snapped back. Alenya stood once more among the silver-leafed trees, the liquid light gone, replaced by solid earth. Her hands no longer glowed, but the echo of that warmth lingered in her veins. Somewhere beyond the maze, Kaelor shifted uneasily. He didn't know what she had seen, but he had felt something, a ripple in the air, a pull in his blood. And for the first time, the thought crossed his mind that Alenya Velorin might not be an intruder in their world at all, but the key to its future. That night, the lunar maze still shimmered faintly in the distance, its silver canopy glowing under the full moon. The contestants slept in scattered shelters around the clearing, their exhaustion heavy. But Kaelor Drovane did not sleep easily. He had been watching Alenya's progress through the maze all day, his sharp eyes catching every subtle shift in her posture, every strange way the mist seemed to part for her. He told himself it was curiosity, nothing more. But when he finally closed his eyes, the world around him dissolved into something far stranger. He stood in a place he did not recognize, yet it felt carved into his bones. The air was thick with moonlight, the ground beneath his feet a pale, luminous stone. Before him stretched a great hall, its walls etched with runes older than the pack itself. At the far end, a figure emerged from the shadows, a woman draped in white, her hair spilling like liquid silver over her shoulders. Her eyes locked on his, and Kaelor's breath caught. It was Alenya, and yet not. She was taller, her presence radiant, her gaze carrying the weight of centuries. When she spoke, her voice was layered, Alenya's tone intertwined with something older, deeper. "You have walked in shadow too long, Kaelor Drovane." He took a step forward, his instincts warring between reverence and defiance. What is this? A memory, a promise, a warning. The hall shifted, and suddenly they stood on a battlefield beneath a blood-red moon. Wolves clashed in the distance, their howls filled with rage. The woman's light flared, holding back the encroaching darkness. The bond between Alpha and Luna was broken once. The pack has bled for it ever since. But the blood remembers. It calls to itself. Kaelor's chest tightened. Why show me this? Her gaze softened, though the power in it did not fade. Because you are bound to her, not by choice, not by tradition, by destiny. The battlefield dissolved. They stood once more in the moonlit hall, the silence between them heavy with unspoken truths. "When the time comes," she said, "you must choose not as Alpha, but as Kaelor." Before he could speak, the vision shattered. Kaelor woke with a sharp inhale, his heart pounding. The camp was quiet, the moon still high. Across the clearing, Alenya slept, her face turned toward the light. For a moment, he thought he saw the faintest silver glow beneath her skin, but when he blinked, it was gone. He lay back, staring at the stars, the echo of her voice still in his mind. He had always believed destiny was a story told to comfort the weak, but now he wasn't so sure. The camp was still, the only sound the low sigh of the wind through the pines. Kaelor sat alone in his tent, the flicker of a single lantern casting restless shadows across the canvas walls. His hands rested on his knees, but his mind was far from still. The dream, no, the vision, clung to him like smoke. He could still see her standing in that moonlit hall, her eyes both Alenya's and not. He could still hear the words that had cut through him like a blade. You are bound to her, not by choice, not by tradition, by destiny. He had never believed in prophecy. Destiny was a story for pups, a way to make sense of chaos. His life had been built on the opposite, on control, on calculated decisions, on bending the world to his will, and yet... He rose abruptly, pacing the narrow space. Every instinct told him to dismiss it, to bury the vision beneath the weight of logic and duty. But another part of him, quieter, older, whispered that ignoring it would be a mistake. He thought of Alenya in the maze, the way the mist had seemed to guide her, the way the light had touched her skin. He thought of her defiance in the second trial, her refusal to abandon mercy for victory. She was human, an outsider, untested in the ways of the pack, and yet she had faced their world without flinching. That should have made her a threat. Instead, it made her impossible to ignore. Kaelor stopped at the edge of the tent, staring out into the night. The moon hung low, its silver light spilling over the camp. Somewhere out there, Alenya slept, unaware of the storm she had stirred in him. He imagined the elders' faces if they knew what he had seen. They would call it weakness, they would call it dangerous, and perhaps they would be right. The Bloodfang Pack had survived for centuries by guarding its traditions, by keeping outsiders at bay. To bind himself to one, to her, would be to invite chaos. But the vision had not been a request. It had been a truth, and truths, once seen, could not be unseen. Kaelor's hands curled into fists. He was Alpha. His duty was to the pack, to its survival, to its laws. But for the first time in years, he felt the weight of that title pressing against something else, something more personal, more human. When he finally lay down, sleep did not come easily, and when it did, it was restless, filled with flashes of silver light and the echo of a voice that would not leave him. By dawn, one thing was certain: the trials were no longer just a test for Alenya, they had become a test for him as well. The morning before the final trial dawned sharp and cold, the kind of air that made every breath feel like glass in the lungs. The camp was quieter than usual, the contestants conserving their strength for what was to come. Alenya sat near the edge of the communal fire, her hands wrapped around a wooden bowl of steaming broth. The scent was rich, spiced root vegetables, a hint of wild herbs, and for a moment it was almost comforting. She hadn't eaten since the previous night, her stomach knotted with anticipation. Across the fire, the rival, the same one who had threatened her before the first trial, watched with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She moved with casual grace, ladling food into bowls, offering them to the others with a sweetness that felt rehearsed. When she handed Alenya her portion, their fingers brushed. The rival's grip lingered just a fraction too long. "Eat well," she said softly. "You'll need your strength." Alenya didn't think much of it at first. She was too focused on the day ahead, on the whispers she'd overheard about the final trial being unlike anything before. She took a sip of the broth. Warmth spread through her chest, but it was followed by something else, a faint bitterness at the back of her tongue. She frowned, glancing down into the bowl. The surface shimmered oddly in the firelight, as if a thin film floated there. From the shadows beyond the fire, Kaelor's gaze locked on her. He had been watching the rival's movements all morning, his instincts prickling. When he saw Alenya pause mid-sip, his jaw tightened. The rival was already turning away, her expression smooth, but Kaelor caught the flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. Alenya set the bowl down, but the damage was done. A slow heat began to spread through her veins, her heartbeat quickening. The edges of her vision blurred. She tried to stand, but her legs felt unsteady, the ground tilting beneath her. Kaelor was moving before she fell. He caught her by the shoulders, steadying her as the bowl slipped from her grasp and spilled into the dirt. The scent of the broth rose with the steam, and beneath it, faint but unmistakable, was the acrid tang of nightshade. The camp erupted in murmurs. Some stepped forward in concern, others hung back, eyes darting between Kaelor and the rival. Kaelor's voice was low, dangerous. Who prepared this? No one answered. The rival's face was a mask of innocence, but her eyes glittered with defiance. Alenya's knees buckled, and Kaelor lifted her into his arms without hesitation. The High Elder's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, but Kaelor didn't stop. He was already carrying her toward the healer's tent, his mind a storm. The healer's tent was dim, lit only by the soft glow of moon oil lamps. The air was thick with the scent of crushed herbs and the faint metallic tang of blood. Alenya lay on a low cot, her breathing shallow, her skin pale beneath the flicker of light. Kaelor stood at her side, his broad frame casting a shadow over her. The healer, an older wolf with steady hands, worked quickly, grinding leaves into a paste and pressing them to Alenya's lips. "She's been poisoned," the healer murmured. "Slow acting, but potent. If she'd eaten more, she'd already be gone." Outside, the High Elder's voice cut through the night like a blade. "Alpha Drovane, the final trial begins at first light. You will return to the circle at once." Kaelor didn't move. His gaze stayed fixed on Alenya, on the faint tremor in her fingers, on the way her lips parted as she fought for breath. The healer glanced toward the tent flap. "If you don't go, they'll call it abandonment of duty." Kaelor's jaw tightened. "If I go, she dies." The tent flap wrestled, and the High Elder himself stepped inside, his presence filling the space. His eyes swept over Alenya, then fixed on Kaelor. "She is not your responsibility," the Elder said, coldly. "The trials are sacred. If she cannot stand, she is unworthy. Leave her." Kaelor canned slowly, his voice low but edged with steel. "She was poisoned. That is not weakness. It is treachery." The Elder's expression did not change. The trials test more than strength. They test survival. If she cannot endure, she fails. And if you remain here, you fail with her. For a long moment, the only sound was Alenya's ragged breathing. Kaelor's mind raced, the weight of tradition pressing against the pull of something deeper, something he could no longer ignore. Then he made his choice. "I will not leave her." The Elder's eyes narrowed. "You would defy the council?" "I will protect my pack," Kaelor said, his voice rising. "And whether you accept it or not, she is part of it." The Elder's gaze hardened. "Then you have chosen your path. Know that it will cost you." Kaelor didn't flinch. He turned back to Alenya, taking her hand in his. Her skin was cold, but her pulse still beat beneath his fingers. Outside, the murmurs of the pack grew louder. Word of the confrontation was already spreading. Some would call it weakness. Others would call it betrayal. But among the younger wolves, a spark was catching. The sight of their alpha standing against the elders for one of their own was something they would not forget. Kaelor didn't care about the whispers. He cared only about the woman lying before him, and the vow forming silently in his heart. She would live, no matter the cost. The healer's tent was heavy with the scent of crushed herbs and simmering poultices. Outside, the camp had gone restless, low murmurs rippling through the ranks like the first tremors of a coming storm. Kaelor sat at Alenya's side, his hand resting lightly over hers. Her breathing had steadied, but the poison still lingered in her blood, a shadow beneath her skin. He had not moved since carrying her here. The tent flap snapped open. 3 elders entered, their cloaks lined with the silver thread reserved for the council. The High Elder led them, his expression carved from stone. "Alpha Drovane," he said, his voice cold and precise. "You have defied the trials." Kaelor didn't rise. "I protected a member of my pack." "She is not of your pack," another elder snapped. "She is an outsider, a human, and she was entered into the trials by mistake. You shame the Bloodfang name by treating her as one of us." Kaelor's bays sharpened. "She has faced every trial you set before her. She has bled for this pack. That makes her one of us." The High Elder stepped closer, his shadow following over both Kaelor and Alenya. "You will return to the circle at once. If you refuse, you will be stripped of your right to lead, and she will be expelled from the trials, permanently." The words hung in the air like a drawn blade. Kaelor rose slowly, his height forcing the elders to tilt their heads to meet his eyes. If you strip me of my title for protecting my own, then perhaps the title is worth less than I thought. A flicker of unease passed between the elders, but the High Elder's voice remained steady. You would risk exile for her? Kaelor's answer was quiet, but it carried the weight of iron. I would risk far more. The High Elder's eyes narrowed. Then hear this. If you continue down this path, you will not only lose your place, you will divide the pack. And a divided pack does not survive. Kaelor stepped forward, closing the space between them. Then perhaps it is time the pack remembers what survival truly means. The tension in the tent was a living thing, pressing against the walls. Finally, the elders turned and left, their cloaks whispering against the floor. When they were gone, Kaelor sat again beside Alenya. She stirred faintly, her lips parting, as if to speak, but no words came. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his expression unreadable. Outside, the murmurs grew louder. The younger wolves were already whispering of what they had seen, their alpha standing against the council, not for power, but for someone the elders had cast aside. The threat had been made, the line had been drawn, and Kaelor knew there was no turning back. The camp had quieted, but the air was still thick with the echoes of the confrontation. Outside the healer's tent, the night pressed close, the moon a pale sentinel above. Inside, the dim glow of the lanterns cast long shadows over the cot where Alenya lay. Kaelor sat beside her, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on her face. The poison's grip had loosened under the healer's care, but she was far from recovered. Her breathing was steadier now, though each inhale still seemed to cost her effort. He reached for the bowl of fresh water the healer had left and dipped a cloth into it, wringing it out before gently pressing it to her forehead. Her skin was warm, but not fevered, a small mercy. For a long while he said nothing. Words felt too small for the weight in his chest. He thought of the elders' threats, of the way their eyes had burned with the promise of retribution. He thought of the rival's smirk as she had handed Alenya the poisoned bowl. And he thought of the vision, the hall of moonlight, the voice that had told him their fates were bound. Alenya stirred faintly, her lips parting. Kaelor, her voice was barely a whisper. He leaned closer. I'm here. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused but searching. The trial. I have to. No. His tone was firm, but there was a softness beneath it. You have to live. That's all that matters now. She tried to protest, but he shook his head. They can strip me of my title. They can call me traitor. I don't care. I will not let them take you from me. Her gaze lingered on him, confusion and something else, something unspoken, flickering in her eyes. Why? He hesitated, the answer heavy on his tongue. Because, he exhaled slowly, because you matter more than the rules, more than the trials, more than they will ever understand. Her eyes closed again, but her hand shifted weakly, brushing against his. He took it in his own, his grip steady, grounding. In that moment, Kaelor made a vow. Not aloud, not for anyone else to hear, but deep within himself. He would protect her, no matter the cost, against the elders, against the rival, against the shadows that seemed to gather around her. The trials had begun as a test of strength, loyalty, and heart, but for Kaelor, they had become something far more dangerous, a reckoning. Outside, the moonlight spilled through the tent's seams, bathing them both in silver. It felt almost like a blessing, or perhaps a warning. Either way, the promise was made, and Kaelor Drovane was not a man who broke his word. The night air was heavy with silver light. The moon hung impossibly large above the Bloodfang clearing, its glow spilling over the circle of standing stones like liquid frost. Every wolf in the pack had gathered, their eyes reflecting the pale luminescence, their bodies tense with anticipation. Alenya stood at the edge of the circle, her breath slow and deliberate. The poison's shadow still lingered in her veins, but she had refused the healer's protests. This was the final trial, the one that would decide everything. Across the circle, Kaelor Drovane waited. His presence was a force in itself, tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair catching threads of moonlight. His gaze was locked on her, steady and unyielding, but there was something else in it tonight, a quiet, unspoken vow. The High Elder stepped forward, his crimson robes whispering against the stone. "The test of the soul," he intoned, "is the oldest of our rites. It is not of flesh, nor of claw, but of spirit. You will stand before the moon spirit together. If your bond is true, it will be seen. If it is false, the spirit will turn away." The crowd shifted, a ripple of murmurs passing through them. Some eyes were sharp with doubt, others glimmered with hope. Alenya stepped into the circle. The stones beneath her bare feet were cool, grounding her. Kaelor moved to meet her in the center, and when they stood face to face, the elder raised his staff. "Begin." The world seemed to still. The wind quieted, the forest beyond the stones holding its breath. Kaelor extended his hand, palm up. She hesitated only a heartbeat before placing hers in it. The moment their skin touched, the air changed. A low hum began to vibrate through the ground, rising into their bones. The moonlight intensified, spilling down in a single, focused beam that enveloped them both. Alenya felt it, the pull, the deep, resonant thread that connected her to Kaelor. It wasn't just emotion, it was something older, something that reached beyond memory. She closed her eyes and let it draw her in. Images flickered in her mind, a silver wolf standing on a cliff, eyes like molten light, a great battle beneath a blood-red moon, a woman cloaked in white, her hands outstretched in blessing. The visions came faster, weaving together into a tapestry of lives and lifetimes, of bonds forged and reforged through centuries. She gasped as the hum became a roar, the light around them flaring so bright it turned the night to day. The pack shielded their eyes, some dropping to their knees. Kaelor's grip tightened, anchoring her as the energy surged higher. She felt the moon spirit now, vast, ancient, and impossibly gentle. It pressed against her mind, not with words, but with knowing. "Show me who you are." Her heart pounded. She opened herself to it, letting the light within her, unhidden, unrestrained. The beam around them blazed white gold, and the trial was no longer just a test, it was a revelation in the making. The light around them swelled until it was no longer just illumination, it was presence. The moon spirit's essence poured into the circle, a force that pressed against every heart, every mind, demanding reverence. Gasps rippled through the pack as the beam split into two streams, one wrapping Kaelor in a mantle of silver, the other enveloping Alenya in a radiance unlike anything they had ever seen. Hers was not the cold silver of moonlight, but a warm, living gold threaded with white fire. The spirit's voice was not sound, yet it resonated in every soul present. "Blood of the first, light of the Luna, the lost one returns." Alenya's breath caught. The words weren't just heard, they were known, etched into the marrow of every wolf in the clearing. The light around her intensified, and with it came visions that spilled into the minds of all who watched. A woman crowned in silver, standing beneath the first full moon, her hands raised in blessing over a kneeling pack. A line of daughters, each carrying the same inner light, their lives woven into the fate of the Bloodfangs. A final image, a child hidden away, her light dimmed to protect her from those who would destroy her. The vision dissolved, leaving only the truth. Alenya's bloodline was unbroken. She was the direct descendant of the original Luna, the first mate of the moon spirit's chosen Alpha, the one who had bound wolf and spirit together in the age before memory. The pack erupted into a cacophony of disbelief and awe. Some dropped to their knees instinctively, heads bowed. Others stared, wide-eyed, as if seeing her for the first time. Kaelor's grip on her hand never faltered. His gaze swept the crowd, daring anyone to challenge what they had just witnessed. The moon spirit's light flared once more, sealing the revelation. She is mine. She is yours. Protect her, as she will protect you. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the spirit's presence receded, leaving the night impossibly still. The only sound was the ragged breathing of the pack, the weight of the moment pressing down on them all. Alenya stood in the center of the circle, her skin still aglow, her heart pounding with the enormity of what had just been laid bare. She had come here as an outsider, a human in the eyes of many. Now there was no denying it. She was the Luna. For a heartbeat, the clearing was silent. The pack stood frozen, their breath caught in their throats, the echo of the moon spirit's words still reverberating through their bones. Then the light within Alenya surged. It began at her core, a warmth that spread outward, filling her chest, her limbs, her fingertips. The golden-white radiance that had wrapped her during the trial now poured from her skin in shimmering waves, each pulse in time with her heartbeat. Her hair lifted in the unseen current, strands catching the light like threads of spun silver and gold. The standing stones themselves seemed to respond, their ancient carvings glowing faintly, as though recognizing the return of something they had been waiting for across centuries. Kaelor didn't move. His eyes were locked on her, not with shock, though there was awe there, but with a fierce, unshakable certainty. He had known she was more than she believed herself to be. Now the world knew it too. The pack began to stir. Some wolves lowered themselves to one knee, heads bowed in instinctive submission. Others shifted partially into their wolf forms, their eyes glowing in the moonlight, a primal acknowledgement of the Luna's presence. Alenya's gaze swept over them, and for the first time she felt it, the bond. Not just with Kaelor, but with all of them. Threads of silver light stretched from her to each member of the pack, weaving them together in a living tapestry. She could feel their emotions, the awe, the fear, the hope, and beneath it all, the deep, instinctive recognition of who she was. The moon spirit's voice returned, softer now, but no less powerful. She is the heart returned, the bond restored, the Luna reborn. The words settled over the clearing like a blessing. Alenya's magic flared one final time, a corona of light that spilled beyond the circle, touching the forest, the river, the mountains beyond. It was not a weapon, but a promise, a declaration that the Bloodfang Pack was no longer fractured, no longer leaderless in spirit. When the light faded, she stood tall, her breathing steady, her eyes luminous with the moon's reflection. Kaelor stepped forward, closing the space between them. He didn't bow, and Alpha bows to no one, but he inclined his head just enough for the gesture to carry meaning. "Luna," he said, his voice low, reverent. A murmur rippled through the pack, the word passing from mouth to mouth until it became a chant, a rhythm that matched the pounding of her heart. She was no longer the outsider who had stumbled into their world. She was theirs, and they were hers. The chant of Luna, Luna, Luna rolled through the clearing like a living thing, each voice adding to the resonance until it became a single, unified heartbeat. The sound vibrated in Alenya's chest, not as noise, but as belonging. She stood in the center of the circle, the last threads of her magic still shimmering faintly around her like the afterglow of a star. The pack's eyes were on her, not with suspicion, not with doubt, but with reverence. Kaelor stepped forward, closing the space between them until the heat of him was a tangible thing. His gaze was steady, but there was a softness there now, a quiet pride that only she could see. "From this night forward," he said, his voice carrying easily over the crowd, "we stand as one. No council, no decree, no shadow will divide us again. The Bloodfang Pack has its Luna, and I have my equal." A murmur of approval rippled through the wolves, some bowing their heads, others shifting into their wolf forms in a show of loyalty. The air was thick with the scent of unity, a rare, intoxicating thing after so much division. Alenya's heart swelled. She turned slowly, meeting the gaze of as many pack members as she could. She saw the young ones, eyes wide with hope. The elders, their expressions softened by something like relief. Even those who had doubted her now stood a little taller, as if the weight of uncertainty had been lifted from their shoulders. She reached for Kaelor's hand. He took it without hesitation, their fingers interlacing, the bond between them thrumming like a living current. Together, they lifted their joined hands toward the moon. The moon spirit's voice came one final time, a whisper that seemed to brush against every ear. "Lead with strength, guard with love. The night is yours." A howl broke the silence, deep, resonant, and unmistakably Kaelor's. It was a call not of challenge, but of declaration. One by one, the pack joined in, their voices weaving together into a chorus that rose to meet the moon. Alenya tilted her head back and let her own voice join theirs. It wasn't the howl of a wolf, but the sound carried all the same, a note of light threaded through the darkness, binding her to them in a way no trial ever could. When the howls faded, Kaelor turned to her, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "This isn't the end, Alenya. It's the first step." She smiled, the weight of her destiny no longer a burden, but a crown she was ready to wear. "Then let's take it together."